We'll start our presentation. Our roadmap for today is a little bit about Harley 101, Harley-Davidson today, Kansas City plant, operating structure, and our structure in action. Harley History 101 in 5 minutes or less. I can probably do it in 3. We've had a steady growth for the first 20 some odd, well, for the last 20 years, we've had a pretty steady growth in our business. As everybody knows, the economy is kind of bad right now, so things aren't as best as they have been. We were founded in 1903 by 4 guys in a shed, and as Tony would probably tell you, I was there to help build that shed. Like I said, we've had steady growth through the war years, the depressions, foreign competition. We merged with AMF in 1969 when we went to an automated assembly line in York, Pennsylvania. Which then we added, like I said, we added a facility in 1973 out in York. We had our buyback from the 13 fellows in the company, bought Harley back from AMF in 1981. We offered public stock in 1986. And Kansas City facility opens in 1998. And we are currently the world's largest producer of heavyweight motorcycles, and I believe our heavyweight share is in the 60+% at this present time against all the competition in 650 cc and larger. We partnered with companies and had a partnership agreement, I believe was signed back in 1995, I believe. And in our facility in Kansas City, we are under one contract, which covers the steel workers, the Machinists, the IAM, and Harley-Davidson. We have one contract there. Our roadmap for success. Our mission statement, we inspire and fulfill dreams around the world through Harley-Davidson motorcycling experiences. We have our mutual beneficial relationships starts with Harley-Davidson University in Juneau, where we train the dealerships and the mechanics from all over the world come to that facility so they can be trained how to fix and learn all the new technologies and stuff with our motorcycles. We offer products as Hog, which also provides a lot of services. They have rides every year that cover from coast to coast, state rallies. We have the Rider's Edge, which is a rider's course given by the dealers. We have authorized Harley-Davidson rentals all over the world. And we've been doing a lot of things with the women portion of the motorcycling, and there seems to be a growing percentage of them. There's dealers that have what they call garage nights, where it's strictly for the women. They come out there and they teach them everything on how to pick a bike up if it falls over, different little maintenance stuff on it. They just spend a lot of time with that. Harley-Davidson brand. #1 brand in the world? Tattoo. It's a brand, if you want to call it, is Mom, and the second one is Harley-Davidson. And just for those that don't know, the picture with the fella on the back, them are the 4 founders of the company. Wrong button. This is our 150th or 100th anniversary at Milwaukee in 2003. The city of Milwaukee just opens their gates, and we have a good time. Some of our advertising campaigns that we have, I'm sure some of you have seen it. Maybe some of you have even seen the one that was in the New York Times here a while back, where they said we were dead. And we replied to that little ad. I don't know, did you see that ad in the paper, New York Times? Oh,
3 weeks.
About 3 weeks ago. The New York Times had said that we were basically was giving us our obituary.
They basically came out and said that Harley-Davidson won't survive through the poor economy because most of our riders are advancing in age and getting to the point to where the folks that are getting ready to retire are our core customers, and since they're losing their rear ends in the stock market, they probably won't have the money to spend on our products. So we took out the whole entire center section of the New York Times and had a little response for it. That's probably true.
So we had a little response for their obituary. We kind of said in no unseen words that they could put that ad where the sun didn't shine, in some kind of words to that effect. So we replied back. But like I said, this is some of our ads that we've used to reach women, the minorities that are riding our motorcycles. Like the one on the end, the woman putting her makeup on, it says blah, blah, blah. Don't do this, don't do that, blah, blah, blah. So, Tony.
All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the Kansas City plant and what we do there. So this is a picture of the front of the building, which is also on the back of my shirt. The plant sits on 320 acres in Kansas City. We're about a mile from the Kansas City International Airport. Out of the 320 acres, there are 50 acres that are improved. So we have lots of room for expansion, and we're hoping for that, obviously. Our building is about 460,000 square feet. The site was chosen because of its great shipping location being in the middle of the country. But one of the things that most people aren't aware of, when the company decided to expand and move into Kansas City, at first they didn't know where they were going to go. And the internationals were confronted by the CEO of the company at the time, and Rich Tierling said, hey, we want to build a new factory and make more motorcycles, and we'd like you guys to appoint somebody to come with us and help us find a place to build a factory that's appropriate for union membership. So that was quite surprising right up front. So, of course, the international unions bought right into that. And Carl Eberly, who's now the senior vice president in charge of manufacturing, as well as Jim Pinto from the IAM, who's now retired, and Keith Kirshner from the United Steelworkers, who's also now retired, traveled around the country looking for a place to build a facility. And the interesting part about that was they had an agreement with the cities. When we come to your town, you can't let people know that Harley's coming, because they didn't want to start a whole bunch of rumors that, hey, they're going to build a new assembly factory in our city, and then for whatever reasons they chose not to go there. So oftentimes the mayor would have these special meetings set up. Carl and the two union guys would go into the meeting and they'd sit down, and as soon as the mayor discovered that Carl had the big checkbook in his back pocket, they slid him to this end of the table and put the union guys at that end of the table. Instantly, those cities got marked off the list. The idea was that the city that we went to had to recognize the fact that we were doing this together, because the whole idea of the operation behind this factory is to try to make sure that the unions are highly involved, because without the company, obviously, unions don't survive. And while there are a lot of negative things in the world today about unions, we're in business to make sure that we employ people, try to get them the best benefits possible, as well as the best pay that we can possibly get. Well, we have to be reasonable about that as well. We can't put the company out of business. So that was probably the most impressive thing about the site selection. Ultimately, we ended up in Kansas City because Emmanuel Cleaver was mayor of Kansas City at the time, and he did a great job of hosting Carl and the two union guys to come in and make sure that Kansas City was the best place, as well as the governor of the state of Missouri offered some pretty big tax incentives as well, which didn't hurt their feelings any. Another benefit to the Kansas City area is our corporate headquarters is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I think we keep Midwest Express Airlines in business. It's pretty rare that you don't find one of their airplanes with one of our employees on it going back and forth to Milwaukee for different meetings. We have a huge workforce availability. There's about 500,000 people in the Kansas City area, as well as we tap the local community college to help us get people hired and do on-the-job training and testing and different things that we need to have happen. In our plant, we have about 800 hourly employees. All hourly employees in Kansas City are union members. We are not a right-to-work state. which was part of the site selection process to make sure that we did not end up in a right-to-work state. In our plant, we currently have a 30-70 split. 30% of the plant are United Steelworkers. 70% of the plant is IAM. Now, in the beginning, the plant was supposed to be divided up 50-50. That's my phone. Yeah, in the plant, we were supposed to be divided 50-50 so that half the plant would be in one union, half the plant would be in the other union. What ended up happening was, originally the Sportster engine was supposed to come to Kansas City along with the Sportster motorcycle, but the United Steelworkers local in Milwaukee didn't want to lose the work because that was going to set them back 300 to 400 jobs. So the president of the United Steelworkers for the local in Milwaukee went to the CEO and the president of the company and says, hey, if you let me keep that work in Milwaukee, I'll save you 30% in the cost of producing the motor. Of course, that intrigued the CEO and the president at the time, so they said, okay, we'll give you a chance. So they pulled it off, and we didn't get the motor. Well, the problem that then created was in our plant, we had about 187 IAM members and about 12 United Steelworkers. The two internationals didn't like that too well, so they sat down and did a lot of talking and ultimately decided that on the particular date that they made the decision, they would divide the plant up by representation throughout the company. So on that day, they took all the union members that worked for Harley-Davidson, put them in a pile, divided it out. 70% were IAM, 30% were steelworkers. That's how the plant ultimately got divided. Before that division was made, the other thing that they had set up was because the United Steelworkers in Tomahawk paint plastic parts, or at the time it was fiberglass, if you painted plastic or fiberglass in Kansas City, you'd be a United Steelworker. If you did assembly work, you would be in the IAM because the York, Pennsylvania plant is 100% IAM. So the plant was divided by job originally with one contract covering all jobs. Ultimately, after the decision came to make it a 70-30 split, that decision was also changed so that what ended up taking place and what we currently have today is the plant is divided by the 30-70 split. We have one contract that covers both unions, and all union members are free to rotate through all jobs. There are two exceptions. All of the maintenance electricians in the plant are United Steelworkers, and all of the tool and die workers in the plant are IAM members. I don't really know the details behind that, but that is the way it ended up.
But of the 800 employees, only roughly a dozen have a jurisdictional right. The remaining of the workforce, people rotate. When you walk past an assembly line, you would have no idea who's IAM, who's United Steelworkers. They all do each other's work.
And rotate about every 2 hours. We have about 130 salaried employees in the Kansas City plant. The interesting part about that is we have no supervisors. We do not have people in the plant that at one time were supervisors and then we just gave them another job to try to hide them in the workforce. The plant was designed to run without supervisors. We don't have team leaders, we don't have group leaders, and we don't have supervisors in our facility. We run our plant off of a natural work group structure, which Mike will explain, and we'll help him here in a little while. But we currently do not have any supervisors in the plant. We do have a process in the Kansas City operating structure which allows for a salaried person to be put into a supervisor role if need be, if we get into a situation where a group's not performing. But it is a cool place to work because simply we don't have supervisors. I mean, think about that. We actually have a lot of leadership people in the plant. We have union stewards that are called co-leads that work directly with the process lead, or what you might be aware of or accustomed to being called an area manager. So you have a process leader that's in charge of an assembly line, and then you have a union steward that works directly with them that's the co-leader. Both of them are leadership people for the plant. But our plant is set up to the point to where, for the most part, it doesn't always work this way, but for the most part, if your group performs and lives up to the scorecard that you have for your group, nobody bothers you. If your group does not perform and live up to the scorecard measures that are set forth for your group, then you get a whole lot of unwanted attention. So it works out pretty well. In the Kansas City plant, we do fabrication, paint, and assembly, and we are the only Harley-Davidson plant that does motorcycle assembly as well as engine assembly. Harley has 2 assembly plants, the one in Kansas City and then the assembly plant in York, Pennsylvania. But we are the only plant to build both. In Kansas City, we make the Sportster family as well as the Dyna family. All the V-Rods, the custom vehicle operation, which is CVO. And we also do the Revolution powertrain, which is the motor that was co-designed between Harley and Porsche that goes into the V-Rod. These are just some photographs of the different motorcycle families that we make. The one in the top right is the Sportsters. I'm sorry, the top left is the Sportster, the top right is the V-Rod. Dyna's in the bottom left, and then the custom vehicle operations in the bottom right, which happens to be a platform that rotates different families from year to year, and this particular year it was a Dyna platform. All right, so under our operating structure, we have 3 types of decision-making processes in our plant. We have a type 1 decision, which is unilateral. Basically, one side, either the union or the management, makes the decision without consulting the other side. It just has to be a certain way in some occasions. We have a type 2 decision, which is a unilateral decision with input. One side pretty much has the authority to make the decision, but goes and asks the other side for their opinion to try to make sure that the decision that's made is the best whenever possible for both sides. The preferred method of decision-making in our plant is a type 3, which is a consensus decision. Just saying no in our facility is not really an option. When you sit down in a meeting and you're trying to figure out how to solve a problem, just because you don't like the answer that somebody or the group basically is supporting, saying no isn't an option. You can't get away with it. What you can do, though, is come up with a plan to try to convince the rest of the group to live up to what you think is a better way. It is a very painful process to take place. You can imagine getting about 15 to 18 people in a room and everybody has a different opinion on how things ought to be. Trying to get all those folks to support one idea is very troublesome at times. However, what we've discovered as a factory is that the plant runs much better. And in the end, even though sometimes people walk out with some pretty hard feelings over the decisions that take place, most of the time we have much more support for the things that we're doing in the plant. All right, we also have 23 elements of shared decision-making that we use to help employees determine how the plant ought to run and where authority lies in different things that are taking place. It talks about employee participation, training, staffing of the lines, the quality standards, information sharing, capital and operating budgets, which all the employees are somewhat involved in making decisions on the budgets for their departments. It sets the expectation for each type of decision that should be applied to all those subjects. So, for example, the staffing decision. Obviously, the company by law is the one that has to do the hiring and firing. The unions have a lot of input into that. Al and I, as union presidents, actually set in and interview every salaried employee that comes to our facility. So whether you're hired off the street or you're a 30-year employee, if you come to the Kansas City plant and you've never worked in our plant before, in order to get hired into the plant, you have to be interviewed by the 2 union presidents and we have to approve it. If we don't approve it, the company won't bring you to our plant.
13 years with the motor company, served 2 different locations prior. I had interview, even though my boss had said we want Fisher to come to Kansas City, I had interviewed with the 2 union presidents, a co-lead, and at least some other individuals, and get the thumbs up before entering that facility. And management doesn't have unilateral right to bring a director level person into the operation without their consent.
It actually goes clear to the general manager level. Carl Eberly was the general manager in our plant for about the first 10 years. He has since been promoted, and he is now the senior vice president in charge of all manufacturing for Harley-Davidson, and a gentleman by the name of John Lowry is our current general manager, Mike's boss. And when John came to the factory, myself, as well as the union president for the steelworkers at the time, actually sat down and interviewed John, and we were told, if you really got a lot of heartburn, we'll do something else, but this is who we want to be in the plant. Turned out John's a pretty good guy, and things worked pretty well. All right. We also have a scorecard process, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. And every group in the plant will have a scorecard. Everybody from the plant leadership group all the way down to a natural work group in the paint shop that will be controlling the wet spray assembly line, or you name it, we've got them. So once a year in August, the PLG, which is comprised of mostly union members, by the way, and some salaried folks, we get together off-site and put together the measurements for the plant that we're going to be looking for. Obviously, the corporation hands us a list of things and says these are the things you're going to do, and then we as a group sit down and try to figure out what are we going to put together to make sure this plant stays productive so that in the long run, we have a plant that remains in the United States making motorcycles. So this is an example of the definition page for the different areas. Obviously, the company measures quality, participation or safety, productivity, flexibility, and continuous improvement, as well as cash flow. And when you look at the champions across the top of the list, the person on the top position, that's a salaried employee from the plant leadership group. And the names on the second name on the list, those are all union members that are either a union steward or a president in the plant. And we sign up to support different portions of the scorecard. And then we're responsible for helping that salaried employee that's in charge of it to define it and then figure out the metrics. And then we have to go in front of the whole entire plant and explain those metrics at different town hall meetings that we have.
Did you break it?
I think I did.
There you go. There we go.
All right, buddy.
All right. The core, in some of the question around like the supervisory side, the core of how this works is in our operating structure, and it's kind of difficult to explain. Hopefully we can get through this visual and it'll start making some sense. So the crux of the shop is broke up into what we call natural work groups. It's roughly 8 to 12 people. In fact, in our labor agreement and our operating system indicates, what the optimum size is. So 8 to 10 people in a natural work group. They all share some function. This may be a group in the paint shop, maybe a portion of the assembly line, maybe a weld cell area. And since there's not supervision, there's some supervisory functions that need to take place. There's reviewing the budget. There is the daily staffing concerns, moving people around. So let's see if it comes up here. What they did was created these roles. We call them operation support roles, OSRs, that they took the supervisory functions and sliced it up into, you can see accountability is the person that reviews the budget for that group, because every natural work group has their own budget in the shop. There's the person that's in charge of safety. There's the person, operational excellence is our manufacturing excellence, lean manufacturing, continuous improvement terminology. The person in charge of quality for that work group, and the person on the planning side is really the individual that takes care of daily movement. Someone doesn't come in, approving vacations, and so they're making sure they have enough people in the natural work group to run their area. And maybe I need to stand on this side. Okay, so all those functions are broken up, and that's the supervisory role. The next level of our structure is all these natural work groups are in a combined group that we call a process area. And the one we'll start off with here is the paint shop. So within the paint shop, there's a lot of different functions. There's hanging powder-coated parts. There's hanging wet spray parts. There's running the wet spray lines. There's finesse area where we do our decaling, striping. There's buffing area, taking any type of fibers out of the clear coat. So all these different natural work groups make up a process area. Now, a process area itself is broken into, missed a big section there. All the shop is broken up in different process areas. We have our fabrication department, the RPT CVOs where we do our engine assembly and the custom vehicle operation assembly. We have the paint shop. And then just for ease of a visual demonstration, we've lumped assembly into one large one. When in actuality, our Dyna line, our V-Rod line, and our Sportster line, every one of those lines is its own individual process area. Now, within the process area, we call it a process work group, PWG. That's really every individual in that process area is part of this one big group. So if there's something that's going to occur that's going to affect, let's say, the paint shop, new launches, any type of, when it comes scorecard time, that whole group is kind of a part of getting that communication. Within the process work group, we have what's called our resource work group. The resource work group is really our engineers that support that area. And one of the things that Kansas City has done is taken a lot of what you would call traditionally salaried positions, and we have hourly individuals filling them. We call them non-traditionals. So the resource work group is the non-traditionals and the engineers. And the reason we call them a resource work group is that our belief is that you're either making motorcycles for a living or you are supporting the people that make motorcycles for a living. Because if you're not doing one of those two, I'm not quite sure why you're with Harley, right? So they're the individuals that are the resources. When a natural work group says, hey, we have a problem, we need help, we can't solve this ourselves, that's the entity that they go to. That's their first line of defense. Now, probably the best example to talk through on this is in assembly. If an assembly line is made up of, say, 10 different natural work groups, and they're all making decisions for themselves, you know, a decision as simple as what time do we take break? They can't all take break at a different time, the chain would never run, right? So for every process area, there has to be some form of governing function that keeps all these work groups in alignment. That area, that governing body is what we call the Process Operation Group, the POG. What that is every natural work group has a member that serves a one-year role that they sit on their area POG. And so you got a member from each natural work group representing the rights of their work group, sitting in with the co-lead of the area, who's the union steward, co-manager of the area, and the process leader, which in a traditional environment you'd call a area manager. So individual representatives, process leader, co-leader, and they make the decisions for when an area has to run, when they, you know, I use brakes as an example, but they're the ones responsible for managing that area. If that area is failing, the plant leadership group goes to that POG and says, you know, let's say an assembly line has a backlog, they're behind schedule. We go to that POG and say, what is your recovery plan to get yourself back in schedule and get your scorecard green? Now, you can't have these individual process areas all individually making their own decisions. There's got to be some function of leadership that governs the whole plant. And we call that our plant leadership group. You heard Tony make reference to it earlier. That process leader and that co-leader represent their area in this plant leadership group. That group meets every Tuesday. Once a month, we do what we call our standards meeting, which is scorecard review for the entire factory. Every area has to go through and talk to the red items, what they're doing to fix them, and they also talk about some successes that they've had. When we have, you know, kind of emergency sort of situations like reductions in volumes, which unfortunately we've seen in the last year or so, we've announced to the SEC. When that kind of information comes out, how the facility is going to manage it, goes to this plant leadership group. If there's a crisis in the plant, let's say a part's not being delivered or we find something defective and it's going to discontinue operations, this group gets paged and those individuals required to drop what they're doing. They attend and we make decisions on how to run the plant. The two union presidents, the general manager, sit on this group. I am a welcomed visitor, I think, but as a product plant manager, I get to influence the group, but I don't get a final consensus. This group is actually broke up into a consenting body and a non-consenting. Except for when my boss isn't there, I get kind of, it's not a vote, but it's really a lobby in to say yay or nay. And if, again, like Tony said earlier, if it's nay, here's the reasons why and what I think we should do differently. So, and then through the rest of the factory, in our structure, the quality, we have some operational excellence resources, human resources, materials, all that ancillary support function is, I mean, they have their own natural work groups. They have, they're called like a resource area group, but they all serve to what the PLGs gives them direction. Some of these resource areas have rotation of being able to sit in on the PLG. Every year, a resource area gets a member that's a consenting body that gets to kind of lobby in, but otherwise they sit in the back and they provide information, but they're not the decision-making body. Does that make sense for a plant structure? Got a plant leadership group that's all basically the leaders, co-leaders of the area that are in charge of a process area, and the way they manage that area is through representatives from the work group. and the work group is the fundamental function of how we run the shop. So, employee engagement at our facility is key. We believe that in this natural work group process, you have to have everyone knowledgeable on the business needs, the business direction, and all information. So communication is key in our facility. That plant leadership group, when they meet every Tuesday, everything that's discussed in there goes into notes and gets published in the shop. So every operator, anyone in the factory can pick up and read what was discussed, what are the issues, what's the direction that we're taking. Same with that, there's POG meetings, that process area group that meets they meet weekly. Their notes are published for the natural work groups to read. But we have monthly town halls. The plant leadership group's notes are published. The POG meeting notes are published. And the natural work group is required to keep their own meeting log. They have a scorecard, an action register for red items on the scorecard, and they have to keep meeting minutes so that we know that the system is driving as it's supposed to. Coming into the Kansas City facility is kind of a different, because of the operating structure so different, we have a pretty in-depth new employee orientation. It is right now 8 days. As an individual, been with the motor company for as long as I was, I still went through new employee orientation. And obviously, we cover things like the labor agreement. That KCOS is our Kansas City operating structure. What I find very unique about our system is that we have a labor agreement that right now is a 5-year term, which is negotiated, locked in, and signed. However, we have this Kansas City operating structure that kind of details this plant leadership group. That is something that the union presidents and the general manager can make changes to it if necessary. They don't have to go through this formal process, and it's not locked into time bound. So when there's structural changes or if the market changes the way we run our system, we can make changes to it, and it's not the same as opening a labor agreement. It gives us really nice flexibility in our system. So that's explained orientation. We explain our approach on quality, operational excellence, and then the majority of the time is spent trying to get people prepared to understand how they're going to work in a natural work group. And if we hire someone that's got 20 years experience in manufacturing, they've probably spent 20 years of their life with a supervisor over and telling them what to do and what not to do, and to show up in a work group and say, who's the boss? And there really isn't one except for their scorecard. The scorecard, their boss is the metrics. And that takes a little bit of reprogramming for everyone, including leadership. It's when you, as a leader, you're going in the organization, when you hear about this, it's kind of mind-numbing, but it works.
The other interesting thing about our new employee orientation is during those first 8 days that you sit in this training class, there's no instruction at all about how you're going to do your job as far as building a motorcycle. So for that first 8 days, you learn about your benefits. You learn about the labor agreement. Half of the classes taught for new employee orientation are taught by union members in the facility. There's people that come in and talk about the company policies. There's a lot of time spent on how the plant runs and what your role is and how that applies to the whole operation. And then after you get out of those 8 days through NEO, then you actually go down on the floor where they assign you to the natural work group that you're going to be a part of. And that's where you get the hands-on experience learning how to put the motorcycle together or paint or weld or whatever your function is in the facility.
So it's really trained for behavior, attitude, and kind of structural compliance, and then the skills get taught on the floor itself. So I want to kind of go through a scenario, which is a real one. We recently went through this to kind of explain how this system works. So we're kind of showing here is that in assembly, in our sports store assembly area, we had a natural work group as they're reviewing their scorecard, and here's a copy of their scorecard. It should be very clear is that under the assembly conditions per bike, it is red. And they are now 2 months in a row red, which the way our structure is written, if you go through 60 days, that you're either you're not green or not heading in a favorable direction, then we kind of get some divine intervention, and the work groups don't want that. So they have an issue. Their assembly conditions per bike is in the red, and per their scorecard, they have to do something to correct that, or they get that divine intervention, as I like to call it. So they're in red. They've got a quality OSR that's looking at it and realizes that the belief is their primary defect is that the side cover, and this is on the Sportster, the clips that hold it to the vehicle are breaking. Gets it in the assembly line, it's verified, and the clip's broken. It wasn't broken when I went to put it on. They start working with, as the quality group is a resource group for them. So they go, we call our resident engineers, which is our connection to the design community and to the POG, and saying, this is the defect that's driving us red, but they can't correct it, right? They don't manufacture the clip. All they do is pull it out of a bin, put it on, clip it on, it's broken, their scorecard's red. So because of being in red, quality then gets, through the resident engineer, starts driving for the design community to do something different. The apparent thing is a material change. When they do change it, and this one actually was a cycle of a couple attempts, failures, till we finally got a success, the design community came up with a new type of material. We tried it as a pilot online, didn't actually correct it. We go back, and after about our second iteration, found a material that does work, and it corrects the condition, and now their scorecard is back into green. So we have a natural work group driving, because of their scorecard, for a design change on the product. Then, one of the things I didn't talk about earlier is with these OSR roles, because they are kind of key supervisory functions, it's important to keep that group communicated. So once a month, we have what we call a galaxy meeting. And the galaxy meeting is for each and every specific OSR. And so in this instance, the quality galaxy meeting, all the quality OSRs from all the natural work groups get together. We may put out information for them to understand how our warranty's doing, what our inside metrics are doing quality-wise for the entire shop, so they're all knowledgeable. But then they'll do shared learnings of, things that they're doing, things they got corrected. So this was disseminated through the the quality galaxy meeting, so that if anyone else is having the same kind of problem, maybe they had an avenue that expedites correction of it. In addition to that, and what's probably key on the point of changing the material on the side cover clip, is that we tie our workforce very close to new products and future products. In a lot of operations, a lot of companies, potential products that are a couple years down the road is kept kind of separate, and the workforce doesn't see it until it's probably close to integration in the system. We don't do that. We have non-traditionals. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, I flew to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, spent a day them going through some potential products for one of our families, and the assembly non-traditionals, the hourly individuals, were in there with me, giving their input of what they liked, what they didn't like, what they saw as potential concerns when we go to launch it. When we do product intent builds, meaning we bring a product that we think this is a potential, we put it on the assembly line, we build it. The non-traditionals are ones that really, and this is hourly individuals, that drive that build. It's not the engineering community. The engineering community does their portion of it till they get a product saying, here, we think you can build that. And then within our shop, the non-traditionals in conjunction with the process areas are the ones that really drive the build itself. Once we do a pilot build, when that build is complete, we do an AAR on every prototype build. And what ends up happening is the quality OSRs from every natural work group, the non-traditionals from that process area, and the design community are the ones that do the AAR. So in these after-action reviews, you have hourly personnel saying, here's the list of issues with that product that need to be addressed. And then they're part of the prioritizing. Some issues that we say it's a nuisance or it's not a very good ergonomic design, but we believe we can safely build it. And there's other things that they'll say, hey, that's a no-show, no launch. We won't build it if it comes that way. As a plant leadership group, we stand on that. The group says we can't launch it that way. It won't launch in our factory. That's really the point of that, is that they'll get that support when it's we can't build it or it doesn't make sense. So final slide here, if we're going to do kind of questions and answers, that our belief, our success drivers is exciting products and services. We're very proud of our product. Empowered and engaged workforce, and that's what equals our sustained success. Apologize, probably felt like a little bit of shameless brand advertising in the beginning of the presentation. However, we believe that it's kind of that story, our history of growth and collaboration, and the really the partnership that we formed with the unions that got us to this Kansas City facility operating in this fashion. A lot of companies I know have tried these kind of structures. There's kind of pseudo high performance work organizations where we can't quite figure out how to get that supervisory function out. This facility's been in operation for 11 years. Started with the thought that it'd be like 200 and some employees. Correct?
That's I figured by the year 2003 we'd have 500, and we had almost 750. Right. I believe at that time, something like that.
Yes. So saw growth that we didn't expect. What's been nice is that the structure has kind of morphed over the years. It has certainly changed. What's written today isn't what was 11 years ago. However, the general premise that the structure is to support the people on the floor, and that they don't come to work and do their job because they have a boss. They come to work and do their job because they kind of they know what the goals are, and they know what the deliverables are, and they will respond to it. And probably the last thing is that the communication side, I can't stress enough being the key, that every bit of our financial information, every bit of our quality information, there is really nothing we do not keep from the unions, right? These two gentlemen, in fact, a lot of times on new products decisions, these two will see it long before I do. They're aware of more things going on in the company than before it gets to me. And that's critical, because the belief is that a lot of times the union and the company on certain situations are very far apart and you can't figure out why. More times than not, it's because there's an amount of information that's been withheld. If everyone has the equal amount of information, more times than not, you actually come to the same resolve of how to solve the problem. And for myself personally, where I've seen that most effective has been the unfortunate downturn in the market, right? With us having to slow up, us unfortunately announcing that we're going to have to do some layoffs in the organization. That's a tough conversation to have, with people that are the leadership that represents the workforce. But what's been interesting is to watch that they understand that the best thing they can do is keep this plant competitive, so that more product comes in. So when there's an upturn in the business, they can get those individuals back, plus potentially grow their membership. And some very hard decisions get made, but it's all based on the fact we all have the same amount of data. We're looking at the same information, and the resolve becomes pretty much well consensed.
I know John said one time at one of the town halls, he'd come out of there, and we were talking about the overall state of the business, and it was at the end of the quarter. And one of the individuals, I can't remember what he asked him, but it was a question about how come this bucket of money wasn't used for this, some kind of capital expenditure wasn't put over here. And John come away and he goes, man, I had to look that one up. Because he's not expecting them kind of questions. There's a lot of information we share with the employees, and they're very knowledgeable about what's going on. They know what's happening. That's the way it should be.
Yesterday, we were in one of the other sessions, and I heard somebody ask the people that were giving the presentation, how much training does your company do for employees in a year? And we all three looked at each other and went, holy cow, I hope nobody asked us that, because we wouldn't have a clue. But let me give you kind of a hint. The employees have a startup meeting at the beginning of their shift that lasts 5 to 7 minutes every morning. And that's when they try to figure out who's there, who's not, get information from the other shift about what equipment's working, what equipment's not working, or whatever big problems may have taken place. Then every Tuesday, the PLG meets to talk about matters pertaining to the whole plant. Every Wednesday, the POGs in the facility meet for an hour or two, depending on whatever it takes, to figure out what they need to do to support the plant and the goals for the plant, and to make corrections to their areas and whatever process they might be running. And then every Thursday, all the natural work groups meet in the plant, and there are 98 natural work groups in the plant meeting to try to figure out how to make things happen. Along with that, once a month we have a town hall meeting where we bring all three shifts into the cafeteria, and we talk to them everything about new products that might be coming to the plant, to financial information, to performance bonuses, a program that we have for employees. We talk to them about just general information. There's different training things that take place. It just depends on what's going on at the time in the company, what we might present at the town hall meetings. And the other thing that we do is, you saw the different OSR rules pop up on the screen. Every month there is a Galaxy meeting for those individuals to come throughout the whole plant. So you have one quality OSR meeting for everybody in the plant to get together. And then it breaks down from there to where now a lot of the process areas are having meetings where they'll have all the quality OSRs from, say, the paint shop will have a meeting 1 month where they just focus on quality issues that are tied to just the paint shop or just assembly or wherever process work group you're in. So there's a lot of meetings, there's a lot of training, and we have in the past when we've had issues with suppliers catching fire and burning down and not getting us seats or whatever the case might have been. We've actually shut the plant down and kept employees working and went through training classes. We have a training department that has a pretty substantial list of different items that we present as training for the employees and try to make sure that people are constantly getting training, because it's our belief in our plant that the only reason our plant is as successful as it is because try to get the buy-in from all the employees whenever possible, try to keep them as up-to-date and trained as much as possible. And like Mike said earlier, we truly believe that the more information you give the employees, the more buy-in you get from them and the more proud they are to work there. So it brings that in. Now, the obvious question.
When do we build motorcycles?
Yeah, we still wonder that. The other thing is a lot of people say, well, does it really work? It works. We've been doing it. I've worked there for 12 years now. Plant's only been open for 11, but I've been an employee for Harley for 12 and in that plant the whole time. We do have groups where they don't get along real well. You know, sometimes you have that where people dynamics get in the way. We have a process to address those kinds of problems. Generally, the group tries to deal with it as a one-on-one matter if it is between two individuals. Then it progresses to the point to where you try to get somebody to mediate the disagreement. At some point, you'll bring in a union steward to try to, you know, set the rules on the floor for people. Obviously, we don't have any authority over our own members. However, a lot of times we can get our union stewards to go in and explain to people that the path you're taking is not the path you really want to be on, because here's going to be the end result. If necessary, it gets to the point where the company gets involved. But I can remember a few years ago when I was the union steward in the paint shop, somebody, will leave nameless, got an employee to quit because he wasn't doing his share. So if you can imagine, here's this guy that works out on a pretty regular basis coming into work and he's not doing his job, and you know he's always complaining that he's hurting and that the work's bothering him, and right beside him is this lady that's about, I don't know, 100 pounds soaking wet and 5'2", and she's out there hoisting these frames around which weigh around 45 pounds, hanging swing arms and doing this several hundred times a day. The lady never complains, and she never gets dirty, which nobody's ever quite figured out yet. She still does this work, by the way. So I'm a union steward, and this is the natural work group that I was hired into to work. And old Al over here is still part of the group at the time, and I get this phone call, you need to come down here, there's this problem. So I went over to see what the problem was, and Al and this gentleman are having quite the conversation about the fact that he's not pulling his weight. Ultimately, the end of the conversation comes, and the guy that Al was talking to walked up, laid his ID badge on my desk, and said, I don't need this stuff anymore, and I'm out of here. Now, that doesn't happen very often, but that is an example of some of the peer pressure things that take place in our plant. There is obviously some controversy amongst our membership about the way we run our facility. You know, Al and I have an office that's right next to the general manager's. The only thing between the general manager of the facility and Al and myself is a piece of glass that's about 3/4 of an inch thick. And in one end of that, there's a door, so we can stare at each other all day if we get bored, I guess. But in the end, you know, the idea with us being right there beside him is the communication's really good. He gets off the phone with somebody from the product development center or the corporate headquarters. We're right there. He can have that conversation instead of thinking, okay, I got to get with those guys, you know, later in the day whenever I run into them. Obviously, that causes some problems amongst the membership. There are some people in the plant that believe, you know, it's more of a traditional outlook that union leaders should not be that closely tied to the company. And that does create some problems from time to time. But I would have to believe that we're doing the right things and that the plant is successful in part because of what we're doing. And I also believe that not all the members feel that we're in bed with the company, as some of them would say. simply because I've been doing this job for a little over 8 years now, and I've been reelected twice. So my own opinion is, 70% of the people in the plant are my union members, and if we weren't doing the right things, or if they truly believed that the process was horrible, then they would get rid of us, find somebody else to do it. The other interesting thing is, a couple of years ago, we had the international unions come in, and the IAM has a interviewing or a survey process where they can bring laptops in. You can create whatever survey questions you want and ask the membership what they're thinking. And one of the things we tried to figure out at the time was we were getting ready to go into contract negotiations, and there was a lot of talk on the floor that we needed to get rid of this environment and just go strictly traditional. And that was right around the time that Saturn did the same thing. So we put this survey together. We put it out amongst all the union employees, and we asked them to fill this out. And it was about 25 questions long. And what we discovered through the answers was that people love what we do. They love the process that we do, but they think everybody else is messed up. So if you looked at their answers, the survey was set up so that you asked them about them and how they fit into the structure, and everybody believed that, I do a great job and I support the structure. And then when you ask them questions about how does your group support the structure, they would say, you instead of A being the best, you'd have a B answer. Well, then the further you got away from me and my group, the worse the answers got on the survey. So that told us that there is general support in the factory for the structure that we have, and that we're doing the right things. We just got to find a way to make that better.
Didn't leave a lot of time, but questions?
Yeah.
How do you decide what is a decision 1 criteria, decision 2 criteria, or
See the labor agreement.
That's already spelled out for us. The interesting thing was when they were designing the factory back in the late 90s, the 2 international guys and the company guy that were on the site selection committee, when they sat down and put our contract together, they sat down and determined what was going to be a decision by which side and who had what authority in that. So some of that was already spelled out for us. The other thing that we have going, and which we've gotten the need less over the years, is we have a group called the parties. And the parties meet once a quarter in the plant, and the parties are 2 corporate salaried employees, 2 individuals from each individual union, as well as Al and myself, and then the local HR manager and the plant manager. We have a meeting once a quarter to sit down and talk about what kind of problems we may have run into that we haven't seen before. And if there's some disagreement as to what the right answer is, then that conversation takes place in those meetings, and whatever comes out of that meeting is the law for that particular instance.
This gentleman over here had a question.
The scorecard that you had, you mentioned that there's divine intervention if you get a couple of reds. What if you go 6 months or 8 months in green, and you kind of take a look at that and say, hey, we could actually do some continuous improvement and set the bar a little better, or a little faster or something like that. Do you change scorecards very often like that?
Scorecards, as a general rule, change once a year. There is situations where it will appear as though one measure might be too easy to achieve, and that will take place where you have a group that has something that they don't struggle to meet at all, and then the process operating group will get together and say, hey, we think we need to push this measure up a little bit. And that happened a lot in the beginning, but you don't see that as much now, because one of the things we did to try to correct that over the years was every year when the plant leadership group gets together, there's a requirement that every measure that you have on the scorecard improves by 5% at a minimum. So certain things are higher. Very rarely is anything lower unless it comes out of corporate that way. But generally, it works that way throughout the whole process, because the plant leadership groups meets and puts their scorecard together. The POG scorecards then get developed based on the PLGs. Then the natural work groups get developed based on the POGs. And each level of leadership has to approve the groups below them for the scorecard measures. So each POG has to present their scorecard to the PLG meeting, and then the PLG has to agree that that's appropriate for the plant. And then when it gets to the natural work group levels, they have to present their scorecards to their POGs, and then as a POG, they have to agree that that's appropriate for their area.
And that scorecard you saw isn't, if we'd go through all the natural work group scorecards, that's not overly indicative of it. You'd see a lot of checkerboarding of red and green.
Quick question about without supervision, and you guys mentioned the kind of one-on-one mediation process. Do you have a formal progressive discipline process, or is it peer-to-peer? How does that process work?
We have a formal. I mean, we have rules and regulations, and we have a progressive discipline. I mean, attendance being the primary one, but when we certainly have behaviors of like no cameras in the factory and no fighting, wasting time. I mean, just like a traditional system would. It's just the work group will try to take care of that on their own. However, I mean, we have this resource work group, we have the process lead, we have the union leadership, and Harley's approach that if you're a salaried individual, you're a leader of the organization. So if you witness someone exhibiting poor behavior, I mean, it'll start with depending on how severe it is of just saying, hey, undo that. But if we capture someone like sleeping in the factory, if I'd walk in and see someone doing it, they'll be gone. But yeah, we have a progressive rules and regulations. But we, for the behavior side in the structure, haven't really had to employ a lot of that. We don't have, and I worked in our one facility is very traditional. I mean, I spent 4.5 years frontline supervisor myself, tremendous volumes of grievances. And, I had to deal with those behavior issues every day. And I walk through the shop and I don't see it at all.
Natural work groups pretty much take care of their own.
Yes, ma'am.
Say again? Our entire shop's not. Our assembly lines, we have one line that runs 2 shifts. The other lines are single shift. Our fabrication department, because of being capital intensive, our presses run around the clock. Some of our weld cells, the majority of our weld cells are 2-shift operations, but the entire facility is not a 3-shift operation. The
Natural work groups cover overtime. We work 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And the natural work groups cover the overtime. Each group has a budget with so much overtime allotted to them, and they're allowed to use that overtime for whatever purposes they need to use. When they get to the point where they've met the limit, then they have to approach their leadership, which would be their POG, and say, we've covered the however many hours of overtime we have for this week, and we have this problem, and here's what we want to do to correct it, and they got to get buy-in from that group. Because obviously at that point in time, the budgets are set up to where if my group's taking extra overtime, it's got to come from his group because there's only so much to be allowed. And if it gets too high, then we got to get the plant manager involved, and it gets ugly.
One of the way the process works, if someone's scorecard on their overtime's in the red and they say, hey, we need to come in this weekend and work, because if they're in the green, I mean, as the leadership, we're hands off. But if they're not in the green, if they're red, it gives us the right to say no, or, why is this? And they have to put together a compelling reason why they have to and what they're going to do so that this ceases. And they got to sell it to the entire plant leadership group, which is not a place they want to be.